So
Oh, all right.
Sounds like we're getting on with recording here, so let's move to the presentation first. Okay, everybody, ready to start. Hopefully everybody's back. And tonight we are going to talk about dial restoration, but not the kind necessarily that involves a paintbrush. This involves using software. And I think you'll find it interesting and you'll be amazed at what you can do. I was, and I'm still learning this thing. So, and I'm by no means an expert at this, which makes me a little nervous doing this because the demo, I mean, if something goes wrong with that demo, it's going to take time to get it back. So hopefully we'll keep that on track, but we'll see here. So let's talk about this a little bit. And, it'd be great if everybody could mute at this point in time, or if David, if you could mute everybody, that would be good. Of course, you're welcome to unmute if you have a question or something comes up, but normally we like to try to run these things in mute. So when and why, we're going to talk about when and why you should restore a dial, or even if you should at all. Give you some examples, talk about some methods. We have a demonstration using the software itself. Talk about how to get it from software to real life with printing in papers, and then any kind of post treatment that might want or need to be done to age the dial or whatever. So why would we even consider restoring dials? Well, in my line of work, I end up with folks that have some very special antique alarm clocks, and these things really get filthied up dirty from people oiling them, and the oil drips onto the dials. The hands are removed. People use anything from pliers to two screwdrivers pried against the dials. I'm telling you, they get mauled, beat, you name it, whatever adjective you want, they get it. And they usually end up coming in. It's funny because when I select a clock, when I go out and find a clock, I usually select for a quality dial, because to me, that's the most important thing, but apparently not to everyone, because I see some pretty rent-a-wreck dials come in here. So anyway, sometimes they're just so bad you can't even read them. And, sometimes you got a beautiful clock and an ugly dial, and you just stare at it and go, what am I going to do about this? It really makes the clock look bad. So anyway, the one thing that we're talking about tonight are dials that are small enough that we could scan them in and then print them out later, which is usually falling within about an 8.5 by 11. If you have a 14 by 14 dial, there are people that can scan that in for you and then can print it out, but you're not going to be able to do that on your typical home printer. So something to consider. Always, if you're going to do a dial for somebody, if you do repairs on clocks and you want to do a dial, always get the owner's permission first, because some owners will get outright incensed if you mess with their dials without getting permission. So always keep the original whenever possible. And that may mean that you have to fabricate a new metal backer for the dial that you're replacing. It's possible. Sometimes it's not possible to salvage the dials in certain situations, and you end up having to do all the work on it, and then literally destroying the dial to replace it. That's not really an advantage, but sometimes it's almost unavoidable. So always keep that in mind and trade that off against whether you even want to do anything with the dial or not. And then I recommend that if you sell the clock, reveal that the dial is not original, and maybe if you can provide the original when you if and when you sell a clock. They're just guidelines. Generally, the clocks we're talking about here are not $10,000 clocks, but they're still valuable to people, and they have a lot of meaning, and sometimes exactly the way they are is the way customers want them left. So okay, so what we're talking about tonight is doing dial restoration using software tools, and there's a variety of different tools out there. They're all really good. Some of them are compatible with Macs, and some of them are compatible with PCs, and some of them are compatible with either. And then there's price point issues. Now, what I really liked about Affinity Photo, which I've highlighted here, which is the symbol for Affinity is right here in the middle. It's really a lot of value for the money. It's an incredible package for what you pay for it. I honestly don't think I will ever learn everything this package can do in my entire life if I restore dials from here to the day I die, which hopefully will be a long time out in the future. I don't think I'll ever get all the features figured out on this. It is that powerful. A lot of people like Adobe Photoshop. It's almost like the standard, if you will, but I've used it and played with it. Yeah, I don't have a problem with it. I just find Affinity Photo a lot easier to use. And the other thing about Affinity Photo, if you have a question, you can Google it. You will find an answer somewhere. Somebody's done a video. Somebody in some chat room has talked about it. There's nothing that you can't, at least I have not been so stuck that I have not been able to get past a problem. And believe me, I've gotten stuck plenty of times, and I'm sure you will too. I mean, the things about this is, you know, we're going to learn, I'm going to show you, give you the ideas and get you started, but you're going to have to go through and learn it yourself, because this is not a class on how to use Affinity. This is a demonstration of what it can do. So, and it isn't that hard to learn. PaintShop Pro was a really good program. I want to highlight that. A really good bargain. My only problem is I'm on the Mac, so I can't use it. It's PC only, and the only way I can use it is if I get a a virtual machine going on my Mac and use it, on a PC virtual machine. And honestly, if I add the virtual machine to the cost of PaintShop Pro, it's more than the Adobe Photoshop. So I might as well not even bother. But yes, I used to use it. And unfortunately, I have a really large, collection of really well restored dials that are locked up in PaintShop Pro that I can't access because I don't have a current copy of it and I don't run the PC anymore. So it's unfortunate, but that's kind of the way it is. That's what happens when you change from PC to Mac. Now I do have a PC here, but I'd have to go out and get a new version and install. And I'll tell you and that's why I went and found Affinity, because I was looking for a way to run it natively on the Mac, because I just love the way the Mac works. And so I stumbled on this, and I really, really think it's a really worthwhile tool if you're looking to do this sort of work. So here's some examples of some of the restorations that you can actually do. The one on the right is the original, and I mean, obviously, and the one on the left was the restored dial. And this was a bit of an investment. This dial was such a mess. It took me probably on the order of 8 hours to do this. I didn't do it all at once. I would do a little bit here or there in the mornings, and, it's just over a couple weeks time I got it done. And that's kind of the way you have to do it. You have to take your time. You have to be patient. And that pays off in the end, because you end up with a really nice, here's another example. This is a Westinghouse timer that I did. Actually, the original wasn't all that horribly bad, but the restoration is even nicer and more crisp and more legible. And it makes the clock, you look at it and you go, wow. So it was worth the effort. The customer absolutely loved it. So, and here's the finished Amazon, the clock, the Amazon. You could see the dial installed there. Here's what it on the left looked like before any work was done to it. So, as well as the dial, the hands had to be dissected, new bushings, collets installed, and everything else. The thing was just, it had suffered from 100 years of being beat to death by, a variety of different hands and just age. So, and oil. Oil is my favorite. It gets on those dials. You can smell it a mile away, and it just stains the heck out of the dials and leaves them unsightly. So, but it make not, if you look at the case of this clock closely, it's really quite a nice original condition. It's never been replated, and it's all original, and it looks great, but the dial was the black eye on it. So and we could have done more to stain the dial and age it, but the customer kind of didn't want to go that far. So usually we start this process off, not usually, always, by getting a printer scanner and we use the scanner to bring the photo into a photo of the dial into the computer so we can work on it. Now, I'll tell you, I saw when I say good quality, I have a HP 8610. It is not that fancy a scanner slash printer. The thing has got to be 9 years old, this thing, and it still works and it still produces absolutely stunning looking results. So I think these days, practically anything that you can buy that'll scan in at 1200 dots per inch should give you the results you want. And then you use the scan, the acquire image feature on the software, whatever the software is. In this case, we're going to use Affinity, but the others have a similar feature that allows you to bring the image in. And you go to the max, which on mine is 1200. Now, the newer printers and scanners might have more resolution, and that would be great. But just remember that if you go too crazy on your resolution, every time you make a change to that dial, it's going to take forever for it to update. So because the software, you're going to tie up the computer with a very calculation intensive process that'll make it slower. So I did notice that color scans degrade the resolution a little bit, but there's other issues with color scans that we'll talk about that make restoration of the dials a little more complicated. And I kind of recommend that if every opportunity you can, you go to black and white and stay there. Because as soon as you go in the color, you have problems. Even the blacks are not black, the whites are not white, and it just gets real hard to get things to work out as well. And then when you print it out, you always have these little color artifacts and dots all over the place that it just takes away from the quality of the dial, I think. So there's two ways you can kind of generally approach this once you get the dial into the software. The first is to maintain the originality by rebuilding the original dial. And that gives you the closest result, but it takes forever. The other approach is to basically tear the dial apart into elements and then reassemble it in layers. Much faster, but you will lose the dial originality, and you're going to spend a lot more time learning all the ins and outs of that software to do that. And Affinity Photo might not be the best product for it, because at some point you're better off with Affinity Designer, and that's a different approach and different product. And they're similar, but not the same. But this, I think, if you use a blend of the two, of those two methods I have listed there, then you could use Affinity Photo or Designer, and it works great, and you get phenomenal results. And that's what I've done with all the dials that I've shown here so far. It's slow, but you know, it's going to take time. But there's nothing you're going to be able to do. If you were going to repaint that dial by hand, it would take you several days anyhow. So. Oh yeah, the other thing it takes is a steady hand with the mouse. So you better have a good mouse. So, okay, so now we're going to go into in Affinity, and we're going to mess around a little bit and see if we can do some dial restorations here. Okay, can everybody see that? We have Affinity up here. I don't hear anybody saying no.
Yes, I think
good.
so.
Okay, good. All right, so the first thing that we're going to do now, I've already done it in this case, but I'll show you how you do it. You go up here into File, and you click on Acquire Image. And what it'll do is you'll see I have the dial sitting on the printer right now, and what it's going to do is it's going to do a preview. You just press Overview, and it'll give you a quick overview scan, or it should in a few seconds here. I have it in a little crooked right now, so sorry about that, but we're not going to use this. I just wanted to show you how to do it. And then you would hit scan. And then when you hit scan, it'll take about 30 seconds to a minute, because you're at 1200 DPI for goodness sakes. And it's gonna scan it in, and you're gonna end up with what you see here. And I'm not gonna do it again now, because I don't want to take the time sitting waiting, and we already have it scanned in. So that's first step. So now if you look at what's going on here, just take a quick peek at the sidebar, you'll see this thing called layers. Layers are really, really, really cool and really important in the work we do with these dials. And you might even want to just kind of, if you were to do this, spend some time learning about layers. For what you do with dial restoration, you don't have to know a lot, But the most important thing you have to know about layers is don't create additional pixel layers, even accidentally. As soon as you do that, you're gonna end up with artifacts. You're gonna put things in and you're not gonna be able to cover them up because there's gonna be patches, basically paint that you put down to clean up the mess in this dial that's going to get in the way of other things you're trying to do. So just keep a single pixel layer is my recommendation. So, and then the next thing we want to do is we look at this thing called levels adjustments. We want to adjust, we basically want to try to adjust, oops, let's see here. As I said, I can end up screwing this up for us. So now what we want to do is we want to do adjustments to the light dark of the dial. So what we have down here that just showed up, when I clicked on that default, I could have clicked on any of these. They all do the same thing. They bring up this levels thing. And I want to do here is in one step, I want to clean this dial up as much as I can. And that means getting the black and white of this dial in balance. And that's actually pretty simple. We just grab the adjuster here and we start to, let's see, what's it not doing? It's not doing what I want it to do. Let's see, which doesn't surprise me. Oh, what am I not doing here? I got to get in here. Then I got to get on the adjustment. There we go. Sorry, I had it on the wrong layer. So now what we're going to do is I want to be on the pixel layer because that's where I want to make all these major adjustments. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to play around with the white and see if I can wash out some of that crud that's in there. And, you know, a lot of what we're going to do with this dial restoration involves crud management. We have to get rid of the crud. And the crud is the biggest thing that's in the way of getting a nice result. So let's bring our black up a little bit here, around 23, 25% or so. And let's take our white into about the 40 range. Seems to look good. And you could play with this. This is very, very much it's just aesthetics and what it looks like to you. Now, you know, you could go further than you probably should, as long as you maintain the black. And you'll see that when I put too much white in here, I'm losing detail. And I don't want to do that. So I want to keep as much detail as I can. And I'm going to ultimately, unfortunately, have to keep some crud along here with it. So right about there, I've seen to minimize the crud, the speckles that are all over the place. And that's about 41%, 44% looks like. And then my black level at about 25 or so, 23 looks, you can turn up the black until what'll happen is if you don't adjust it, now the blacks are gray and you'll have a big problem because you have to go in and turn all that gray to black. So I want to turn the black up until I have my black restored pretty well. I'm never going to get rid of the, direct with this. I'm not going to get rid of all the damage here, but I want to get rid of as much as I can. So that looks pretty good. So let's go with that for now. And we're good to start. And let me see, I have an extra levels adjustment here and I don't like having that. I'm going to get rid of it. This levels adjustment, I want to get rid of that. Oops, I did the wrong one. There's my adjustment. Okay, I'll turn that one off for now. We'll just not use it. That was an extra one that got left in there. Let's get rid of it anyway. Okay, there we go. All right. So again, it's getting used to working with these layers, and even after you've done it a while, you just kind of have to get used to it. All right, so now we look at it and we say, okay, what else do we need to do here? Well, we have a lot to do. My recommendation is, if at all possible, rewrite the text if possible, because that's really hard to restore. And I'll show you what I mean. In order to restore it, you would have to zoom in on it. I mean, way up, maybe even 300%, bring it into the window, and then individually work on every one of those levels every one of these letters, you'd have to work in, fill in, clean up around each one with the paintbrush. And it's just a big pile of nightmare. It just takes forever. You can do it. But like, for example, here, I'll show you what you do with if you select the paintbrush. I don't know where my paintbrush went. There she is. Okay. You gotta watch them. Sometimes if you use some of these, it tries to be smart and moves them around, and then you're sitting there trying to find them. So anyway, we'd have to come in here, for example, with our paintbrush and get rid of, let's see, did I get my opacity right here? Yeah, I think I did. Let's look at the black. There, I have to select if I want to do black, I do black. I want to do white, I do white. And I'd like to do white. There we go. So what I would have to do with the pen, I got to get on the pixel layer again, which I keep forgetting to do, and go in here and paint out all the bad stuff that you don't want. And this would take a lot of time to do, but you're going to have to do it anyway. It's just, do we really want to have to do it on all these little areas? And I'm kind of thinking that's probably not a real efficient use of the time of our time. So what we're going to do is we're going to go in and we're going to select over here on the left bar. You can see there's a text tool. We're going to pick a text tool, the artistic text tool, although we could just as easily use the frame text tool. In fact, I think I'm just going to do that. And then we're going to lay down a block there and start writing. This top one says the prompter. So we're going to take that. Now, I did a little cheating on this. You could go back and you can spend time and you can look at this yourself if you want, but I learned the hard way from looking at this that about a 7 in a Callisto MT is pretty close to this. Now, I must say that the difficulty with trying to replace text is that these 100-year-old dials at the time, there was no concept of font. It was all typeset and, hand printed letters. People were just, they just drew these in terms of what looked good and what was popular at the time. So there may or may not be an exact copy of what this font is, but usually you can get close. Now, obviously this, which is about the same size as what's there, that's great. But the problem is it's too squished together. So what do we do about that? Well, it turns out that if you go up in the text and select spacing, you can loosen more, and you can loosen more even again. And you can loosen more even again. You can keep going with this. Let's do it one more time. There. So now we have the spacing about right. Now, because we scanned this dial in, it's a little wonky. It's not quite vertical. So now we can take this and we can rotate it just a little bitty bit to line it up with the one that's there. And in fact, then what we're going to do is we're going to take this and we're going to lay it right down on top of it. You're going to think I'm crazy doing this. But and then we're going to look at it and we say, oops, look at that. It's a little bit wider than we needed. Okay, so then we'll come back up into here, go to spacing and tighten it just a little bitty bit. And there we are. It's pretty close. Then we're like, okay, we got it now, right? Well, now we got a big mess behind it. So what do we do? Well, we can deal with that. And this is, again, one of the more important aspects of the fact that we have layers, because the pixel layer is not the same as the text layer. The text is on a different layer because you can see here, it has its own layer. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go back into the brush tool and we're going to get our white and we're going to select the pick here. We're good there. We got the pixel layer. And then we're going to go up here and we're going to make a nice wide brush and we're going to clean this up. And guess what? it does not wipe out the text. And the reason is because it's on a different layer. And that's really the cool thing about layers and why they're so important and so valuable here. And while we're at it, I never can resist going around and cleaning stuff up while I'm talking here. But anyway. And you could use any pen size you want. You just go up here and pick. I could pick a 460 pixel pen size and go after it. And if I go, whoops, I went too far, you just do a Control Z and it comes back. So it's easy. So that takes care of the prompter. Now let's get back to this again. And let's take care of the intermittent. Well, I still seem to have a problem with the orientation here. So how's that? That better? Yeah, that looks better. And in fact, maybe it's not quite centered, but you get the idea. I mean, you can play with this with a fine touch. You can get it where you want it. And now we have this intermittent. So let's just go over here and take another text box. And well, since I already know that it's going to be about a 7, I think. And Callisto MT. And again, you can look at these other, you can go and you can look at these other ones and decide if you think there's a better one. But so there's that. And then we're going to make it bold like we did before. And then it's crooked, but and then we're going to do what we did by going into text, select spacing and loosen more. Text, space. You can use the shortcuts too. I mean, once you get good at this, you can go crazy. So how's that? Is that good? Oh, let's do one more, small one. Loosen. There, that's pretty close, right? And then again, nice and crisp letters here. Well, I just kind of feel like maybe I still need to loosen it a little more. Oop, that's on me. Box isn't big enough. Okay. There. Okay, that's close. Now we're going to move it back on top. Pretty close. And then we now go into our pen brush tool, whatever you want to call it. And then we go back to pixel. Oops, that's a huge brush. Let's go with something a little smaller there. Yep, it's working. So then I can clean up behind it. And voila, we have our text in and restored nicely. So that's cool. Now, another area where, let's zoom out a little bit. And again, if you don't like anything about what you're doing, you can always go back and re-choose it. Just pick the right layer and play with it again. So there are a couple of things about this dial that until you fix them, they're never going to look right. I mean, big messes like this around the 4, you need to obviously fix. And those are really cool because you fix those in a few minutes and the dial looks 100 times better already. But the other thing that is really annoying is when the circles are all faded. So, okay, so how do we fix the circles? Well, Affinity has, I just want to get this thing in the window here. Affinity has a really nice feature called the ellipse tool. They actually have a number of these geometric tools here. Here's pick the pie tool, rectangle tool, ellipse tool. I'm going to pick the ellipse tool. And what we're going to do is we're going to go in here and we're going to make a nice big circle. Whoop, that was too big. Way too big. Got away from me. Oops, that wasn't supposed to happen. We want to get rid of that one. Get this one in here. But I don't want any fill. I want this opaque. So we're going to go over here and opaque it. No, it's just an outline. So now we're going to come and we're going to match. Let's do the inside circle of this minute track first. And we're going to try to pin this thing up as best and as close as we can. And you see what I'm doing here. It's pretty easy. You just come in here. I mean, these, like it or not, these dials are not round. One of the things I have learned, and there's nothing in the geometrics of these things that's exact. So we just kind of have to play with it and get it as close as we can. And you'll see that's pretty good. But now what we want to do is we want to make that a real line. So we're going to go in the stroke. And let's see, we're going to stick with opacity. That's all good. But then I want to come up in here and increase the width of that line. Oops, too much. Maybe to maybe 0.5. Yeah, that's pretty close. Maybe 0.4, 0.5. It needs more. But you see you get the idea that we've just kind of, okay, so now we have a line. Now we have a circle. Now you could do the same thing with the other circle. We could do it now. But we could, you get the idea, so we don't need to do it. Just shows you how much of an improvement that makes to the appearance of the dial when the minute track is outlined. And once again, just like before, now we've created, see these ellipse shouldn't even be here. That was a mistake. I think it was a mistake. So we're going to get rid of that one. And so here's where it's important to manage these layers. If you see yourself accidentally, like I did, create a layer that you don't need, get rid of it, because you will create problems for yourself if you don't. You'll have artifacts and weird things happen. So we go back to the pixel layer and let's blow it up a little bit here. And gee whiz, if I look at this and I say, well, this is fuzzy all around here, I want to clean this up. What do I do now? Well, okay, we can do that as we did before. We select the brush tool, we go back to white, and we are in the pixel layer, so that's cool. And darn, anyway, I lost my opacity again. Sometimes it resets. It's easy to fix. And you can go back and you can clean up around this circle and you won't affect the circle because it's on a different layer, which is really great. And you can see there, if the line is too thick because of the out of round of the dial or the minute track, you can clean that up and get what you want. And then you can go back later and clean up these little areas and add your little lines across here to fix that. So that's real cool. Now, there's a couple other things I want to show you before we go into using the pen tool to fix mistakes. And that is this thing here. We've got made by the New Haven Clock Company, New Haven, Connecticut, USA. But guess what? It is so covered in gunk and crud. I don't know how we're ever going to restore that. So let's make a new one. How do we do that? Well, let's back out a little bit here, just too much. That's good. And let's go back to our ellipse tool again. And let's create another ellipse. But this one, this time is going to mark the outside of our made by, our manufactured by. Let's get rid of the fill. Driving me crazy. Can't see anything. So I guess it's kind of like, oops, went too far there. So here we are down at the bottom. Here we see our made by. And we're going to we think we could follow the same process that we've been following to create the text, but I'm not exactly sure where this is going to land. So we may have to play with the ellipse a little bit when we're done, but that's okay. So let's go over here to Artistic Text Tool. And right at the point where you'll see as I'm passing this cursor over that line, I get a little T. So I want to click now on that. And right at the point where I click on that, I get a little green arrow, and that green arrow can be slid around. But the important thing now is that I can basically start typing. But before I do, I notice the cursor's on the wrong side of the line. So I want to reverse that and do this. And now hopefully it's there. There it is. It moved over literally all the way to the other side. But here's the problem. This is huge. So now I got to go down to what? 4 and 4.5. Let's try 5. And let's stick with Arial because this one actually looks pretty close. So then we type it in. Oops. So there it is. Now, let's see, let's move that to where the other one is. Okay. That's pretty close, right? If you remember what we did, right? We go in and we take our text tool and we do the loosen more thing to it. Is that it? No, let's do it one more time. Yeah, let's tighten it a little. Boing, there it is, right there. Beautiful, right? It's pretty close. So I'm going to go ahead. Well, I'm going to push my ellipse up a little bit. There it is. And voila, I'm pretty close. Yeah, is it exact? I don't know that I want to fool with it anymore. It's pretty close. So there we are. Now we got a layer. We'll go back to our pixel layer and let's clean up that ugly mess and see if it works. Hopefully it will. Where's our brush? We go over there. We go to here. We pick our opacity back to 100 again. I wish it wouldn't reset. And this 100 pixel, I don't know, something. Let's see. That's probably close. And I'm going to zoom in because this is tricky without being able to see what you're doing. In fact, I'm going to zoom it in even more. It's actually not as tricky as I think because look, I can't mess up my line here. So I can mess up these lines though. We have to be careful. If I pass my brush over it and whatever it is I pass it over disappears, that means that if I press down on the mouse, it's going to be gone. So I got to be careful. I'm pressing down on the mouse as I do this, and it actually allows me to paint that white and get rid of that group. And I can just click in one spot if I want, if I'm getting too close. And, you know, and again, if I'm going along and I go, oops, I shouldn't have done that. I just hit Control Z and it comes back. So there it is. Those are kind of the biggies there. You can do a lot very quickly with cleaning this. Just while you're here, you just get tempted to clean up some of this ugly stuff. I call it crud because the crud is the thing that makes the dial look bad. And if you leave the crud there, you're going to see it when you're printing and it's going to look ugly. So we want to get that out of there. Oops. Which, well, I'm going to leave that because you know what? We're going to go back and fix that later. Anyhow, we're going to add another ellipse and get rid of that, cover that up. That'll be real nice. So anyway, as we go through this, now let's back off and see what it looks like. Do I need to do any more with the that made by? Let's see. I go back to my artistic text. No, I don't really think I do, but maybe we try to do a bold and see what it looks like. I mean, it's up to you. I mean, you maybe leave it without bold, see how it looks. You could always come back and fix it if you don't like it. And there it is. That's our made by is in there. Our text is in here. So there's a big part of trying to deal with this. Now you have to do play the same game with the circles on this baby dial up here. Actually we can also do arcs too. To do arcs, we select, we go in here and we select the, where is it? The pie tool. We go in here and we select the pie tool. I'm not going to do it right now because it's a little bit of a trick and, I'd have to rewatch the video to see how to do it, but I did it and it works and it's really cool and it works great. Oops, I just added me a ellipse I didn't want. Or did I? No, I guess I didn't. Okay, good. I better get out of this because I'm also adding text that I don't need, damn it. Okay, so go back to pointer and that's the safe home and there we are. So All right, well, that's some of it. Now let's look at fixing some of the numbers, because this is really kind of cool too. So we blow up the numbers. I'm telling you, we can make those numbers so big that you can see the individual pixels. So let's look at the 6, really blown up here. This is a 200%. And it really does help a lot to have it this big. But now I need my brush tool again. We go on the brush tool, and you can see here we have paintbrush tool. There's lots of little things you can learn all about. But anyway, we're not going to worry about those right now. We're just going to use what we use. And I use the paintbrush tool a lot on this. And we can go around here. This just seems to be too big, but we're going to see these little stalactites and stalagmites that are laying all over the place. Oops, I goofed. Control Z. And which, by the way, you want to let off on the mouse every so often when you're doing this cleanup, just in case you, oops, do that. Then you can Control Z and only lose a little bit. If you hold this mouse down for like 10 minutes and you're doing this and you hit that and you mess up that number, you're going to have to redo everything that you did before if you do a Control Z. So it's good to let up off the mouse once in a while to avoid that, because you will make mistakes. It's just not possible to not make mistakes. So let's go back to black, and let's go back to smaller pixels. And I can go around now and I can clean up inside. Remember up here, I picked the black, so I can go back and forth between black and white, and my pen changes color, or my brush changes color, and now I can clean up that mess. And on and on and on it goes, and I can keep playing with it. And actually, after a while, you get obsessed, and it gets to be fun, and you don't want to stop, and you just can't stop, and it's just enjoyable and relaxing. Only if you have a steady hand, though, because if you don't have a steady hand, you're going to go crazy. I mean, if your hand's doing this on that mouse, you're never going to be able to do this. So, but hopefully you have a steady enough hand to enjoy this process, because it really is a lot of fun once you get going on it. And some of these, if you look at some of these irregularities on these numbers, some of it, that's in the original printing. That's just the way the paper printed. And honestly, you can go in there and you can clean all those up if you want to. You pick a smaller pixel size and you can literally clean those up so they're better than they were printed originally if you want to. It's up to you how far you want to go with it, but you're at a 200% zoom right now. So, you know, that's 20 times basically bigger than the thing is. So. And you can see, oops, I went too far, but that's okay. We'll fix it. One of the nice things about working in black and white is if you screw up, black and white is all you have to worry about. You don't have to worry about what color tone it is, because then you got to use a clone brush. And I hate using the clone brush, because the problem with the clone brush is that it allows you to like click up here and pick a color, and then you can copy that color here. But the problem is that it's never the same across a dial. So I've given up on trying to do color dials. It's just, it's not worth it. If you can convert, the best bet is to convert to black and white and then work in black and white as far as you can. So that's kind of the general nature of it. And, you know, the cool thing is if we could just get a small section of this thing cleaned up, you can see how it looks when we back out, and it's pretty neat. So let's see, let's back out. Look at that. And then nice, look around that 6, just that little bit of work. And look at how nice that is. You can imagine you go through the whole thing. We could fix the 4 if you want. And it's not hard. I mean, you just got to have a steady hand to run that line across there, but that's not hard. And, you know, before long, you got real progress. Now you look at this little dial for the alarm set and you say, God, that's hard. Well, it is kind of, but once you go in here and you blow it up, you go to well, I don't know if I want to go 500%, but yeah, even at 500%, I can make a lot of progress in here cleaning this mess up. And a lot of the problem is just this residual crud on here that needs to be taken care of. Again, we do the same thing with the circles on here. We clean those up the same as we did before. Just remember that if you create new layers for the circles, you could always paint over to get rid of this background stuff. But if you run the paintbrush to repair these, you are not going to be able to do that. So, and I do not recommend multiple pixel layers. It is scary and dangerous and causes problems, but it's up to you if you want to experiment with it. You know, have at it. It's just software. And it won't hurt. It's not actually hurting anything physical except your feelings when you realize you spent 2 hours and you just messed it up. But you'll get better and better at it as you go. So anyway, yeah, I mean, this is just another example of how quickly you can really make hay cleaning some of this up. And you know, you look at this arrow and you say, well, that's intimidating. Well, it isn't actually all that bad, because if you zoom in on it, and boy, you really can zoom in on it, you can see pretty quickly where the problems are. You need to run a black line through the center of it, and then you just need to clean up in between these by running the white brush across, and that'll make a huge, huge difference in what you have. And again, I can't resist but to clean these things up as I go. And we're not going to have time for me to do all this tonight, but you get the general idea, I think, here, and how quickly and how much progress you can make with nothing but the pen tool. If you learn nothing else tonight, learn about the pen tool, which is, or the brush tool, which is right here. So, and there it is, making great progress as we go here. So a lot of mess here, cleans up the same way. It looks terrible. If you drop in an ellipse to fix these lines, all of a sudden things start to materialize for you, and you start to see what it is that you actually have to do. So, and that's why I kind of would recommend, if you're going to do if you're add the layers first, I would say add the, you know, add the do the numbers. The numbers are layers. I'm sorry, the text is a layer, and the circles are layers, and the made by is a layer. You know, those are layers. Add those in first, and then go back and, you know, paint everything and clean it up, and you'll make progress a lot faster, because you'll be able to see what you're doing and where you're going. So anyway, yeah, that's sort of the nature of it. And then now some of you are probably wondering, what do I do about color? What if I do actually have color letters? And I don't know how many of you noticed as we were going, but this prompter was actually in brown, and I cheated and just overlooked it. I cannot change. Unfortunately, I have not figured out, maybe there is a way. I have not figured out how to change the color of text in a black and white scan. So if that's the case, and you're really kind of hot and bothered about having this in color, well, then what I would suggest you do is bring it in this way in color. And then what you can do is you can do the almost exact same thing we did before with the level, where we changed the tone, the blacks, and remember the black and white? We changed the black and white, and now what's left is a little bit of color here, and it's a pain in the neck, but it isn't too bad, because most of this is black and white. But the advantage now we have is we can put our this thing drives me nuts. We could put our text in color. If you scan it in color, you can then drop in a color text, and which is what I did right here. And other than that, everything's the same as what we just did across the whole thing. Of course, I haven't gone in yet here. I just did this as a demo for this text. I haven't gone in here yet and done anything with the ellipses to create my lines for the minute track or for the set dial for the alarm. So, okay, fine. We could do all that later, but I'm not going to do it now, because you guys have seen the basics. And, you know, for me personally, again, I absolutely prefer to do everything in black and white. And here I've jumped ahead on you and did some other repairs on this dial before, and just to kind of show you where it may be going. And you can see that I've spent some time here cleaning up the arrow, and I did use the arc for that. I even dropped in a layer here to center this dial. When later I go to cut it out, I'll know where the heck I am laying the thing down. So I cleaned up the 6. I put in the black and white here. I put in the made by, and I did use bold. I put in all the circles. I haven't gone and cleaned around all the circles yet, but I have put in all the circles. And now I got to go. Now the next step would be obviously going back over every number one by one to clean it up and give me some contrast with the numbers using the pen tool or the brush tool. And then what I would do is I would go back and put in the hash marks at every one of these, clean those up. How do I do that? Well, here we go. I mean, there's probably other ways to do it that would need to be explored. But honestly, for me, the easiest thing to do is just come in here and use the pen tool. I keep calling it that, but I think it's really called the brush tool, and just put them in. And you get all hot and bothered about the fact that they're a little crooked. And yeah, we probably should worry about that, but you are looking at 200% right now. So a lot of that is going to just disappear. When you, here we have a thicker one. I'm just going to clean this one up. And I can go back and white over this now, because these not the one I just drew in, because that's still at the pixel layer. So I cannot erase around those. But yeah, I can add those in. It takes a little bit of time, but it's not terrible. And if you make a mistake, you can go back and fix it. It's not real hard. So just looking at this left side now, when you zoom back out, you go, oh, wow, that looks a little better, than it did. Now things are starting to clean up on it. Okay, so that's kind of it from that point of view. We're not done yet. I just want to finish up the presentation. Does anybody, before we go out of this, does anybody have any other questions about the process and the demo here?
This is Steve. I just have it about the printing and to use any special paper.
The paper? Okay, we can go out and talk about that. Let me stop sharing the tool, and let's go back into the presentation where I talk about that. So yeah, paper is enormously important. I cannot say enough about it. The temptation is to use a real heavy cardstock. Unfortunately, I have a hard time finding good cardstock that has a good finish. The finish of the paper, and you can take your loop and you can look at it and you can compare papers. I use this the best results I've gotten have been with this Southworth product in ivory. There's a lot of papers out there, and there's a lot of people who manufacture different weaves and textures. I'd avoid anything with a texture, anything almost with a weave. Just go with the finest grain paper you can find. This Southworth stuff seems to be a really good starting point. I've messed around with this ClearPath paper. It looks okay. It's not bad, but for my money, it has just a little bit too much grain to it. And what that'll do, and you know what, the dials still look pretty good when you print them out on that. But they do, under magnification, you will see a little bit of graininess in the paper that it doesn't do terrible things to the print, but you see the paper with a little bit of texture, it just doesn't look like a dial. So, just kind of pick a paper. If you want to, go out and buy some sample papers, or go to Michael's or wherever and look at paper. One thing you should never do is use photo paper. Photo paper does not look like a dial. It looks like a photo. And, anybody from 10 miles away covering one eye will be able to tell that it's a reproduction. if you use photo paper. So, look around. Some of the papers that I used in the past aren't even available anymore. The manufacturers just go through these like continuous, sort of iterations on paper to try to get the paper what they want. So I don't know if you can even still buy this Southworth. I think so, because I think I saw it on Amazon, and when I was getting the pictures and so forth ready for this, I think I actually pulled this off of Amazon. So I think you can still buy it, but go to Michael's, walk around, look at paper and see what you like the best. Or anybody that carries prints and, things like that, copy stores, office supply stores, those kinds of things that will have papers that you can look at. I actually went to Bill at Bill's Clockwork work, and because he was selling reproduction dials for a while, and I asked him what he used, and unfortunately he couldn't remember. So if I learn more, I'm always looking around to find what I can. And so if I stumble onto any of it, or if he stumbles upon where he bought it and he lets me know, I'll share that. But unfortunately, I've had to create pretty much from scratch all of the context that goes into making these dials. So as far as printers are concerned, I told you I use the 8610. I use an 8-year-old printer, and I set it to the maximum quality, and the damn things print out so good. You're like, wow, it's amazing. Under a glass, it looks good. So, I mean, it's really quite impressive what a high quality inkjet will do. I've wanted to try a laser printer. I have not done it. Laser printers print black and white. So if your dial has color, you're going to have a hard time. Now, I know you can buy a color laser printer, but it's going to cost you a pretty penny for the one word or something that is color. You might be better off just taking your file over to, Kinko's or somebody, and, whatever they happen to have. I don't know necessarily that their printers are in very good condition, but it's worth a try, I guess. I've never done that because I've had such stupendous luck with my silly 8-year-old laser printer. So anyway, so here's some thoughts for you on post-treatment. You can add age. Everybody has their opinion. You read about, drag a tea bag over it, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, but when you actually go to do those things, they look horrible. So, I mean, but it's up to you. Like there's a version that says lay coffee grounds on it and then put it on a tray in an oven at 200 degrees. It just looks blotchy and horrible if you do that. I've never gotten good results from any of those, sort of internet solutions to aging paper. But the one that I have done that works and works well is using a heat gun to burn the paper. But you have to be so careful because you can go from, ivory paper to black in a millisecond. And, there's no way to reverse it. So you just got to you got to get a feel for it. Work with some blank pieces of paper first, play around it. The one thing especially if you use inkjet, the one thing I would recommend is sealing the paper when you're done. And matte fixative seems to be my favorite. I have tried satin lacquer. Problem is it can puddle, and if it puddles, it could cause smearing. So you'd want to dust coat that on if you use lacquer. But clear matte fixative, you almost can't puddle the stuff. It just doesn't want to be puddled. So, and that's what it's designed for. It's designed to seal in, carbon, charcoal pencil, those sorts of things. So it works really well holding the colors together and holding it all to the paper. And you might want to use a couple coats. Just don't saturate it, because as soon as you do, you may smear. This matte fixative I use is Grumbacher stuff. As hard as I've tried, I've never really been able to smear it. So this might be a good product, but there are other fixatives. I'm not recommending one or the other, but this one seems to work pretty well. So the other thing I want to point out while we're on the topic is that there are options for working directly with the original dial. And here, what I did, this was a luminous dial. Now, the good news here is that all the luminous paint was quote unquote missing. So somebody else had the good fortune of cleaning it all up out of the inside of the clock before I got it. So that made me a little more willing to work with it. So this takes a super fine brush. You mix up some color. I still use acrylic, water-based, a good quality raw water-based acrylic paints work fine. They have plenty of working time for the time it takes to paint one number. I do all the work under a microscope, though. I saw, one of our folks here had a microscope in the background. If I remember who it was, I wasn't paying good enough attention. Tim Schultz had it. And that's kind of what I use. I use one of those microscopes, but you put this number under a microscope and all of a sudden it's as big as your hand. And it's a lot easier to paint than it is without it. So my eyes just are not good enough to paint without that kind of magnification, and neither do I have a steady enough hand. Now, it's amazing once you put something under a microscope, how steady your hand becomes. It's a weird phenomenon, but it does tend to work. And you can paint these numbers up, and you can see here, I mixed the paint to match I didn't touch up this Super 8. This was already there and it was already the right color, and I just matched to that, and you can hand paint it and get a reasonably good result. Is it perfect? No, but that darn dial looked a whole lot better than it did when I got it. So, and that's really all that that you can do. So that's sort of what we had for tonight. I'm happy to answer questions or go back over things or whatever, if anybody would like. But I'll tell you, you get into this, and I mean, it really, once you get the hang of it, it's really enjoyable. And you will waste hours and not even know where the time is gone. And what you'll end up with is a gorgeous dial. So anyway, I hope that kind of gets people at least a little taste of it and maybe started. Again, this isn't a program on how to use Affinity top to bottom, but there's not a whole ton you have to learn to make a lot of progress very quickly. So that's the good news. And as I said, I really don't think I will ever use anywhere near the capabilities of Affinity doing dials if I live to be 100. So that's kind of what I like about it. It's almost like no matter what you run into, there's a way to do it. Lots of capability behind it.
Yeah, I've got Adobe Photoshop, and you can do so much with your photography, and I'm sure many of us take a lot of pictures. It's just amazing what you can do with any of these software packages. And now with an iPhone, it's got so many filters, even before you get it into Affinity or Adobe or Paint Shop, you can do a lot with it, and then up the ante again once you load it into the software.
Yeah,
It's a lot different than it used to be when we had a dark room and a little red light and we tried to work with black and white. It's just a whole lot different.
Well, the principles behind rebuilding photos is pretty much like what we just talked about. I mean, you have layers and you can work with layers. You can add and subtract things from other pictures. You can put things together. You could add color, subtract color. Yeah, it's the same sort of thing. But I think what's interesting to me is that if I learned everything there was to learn about doctoring photos and using Photoshop to do that, I don't think I would be any better at knowing how to do dials. It's just different in some way. There's different things you do, but the fundamental of how you use the tool is the same. So it doesn't make sense, I know, but it's kind of a different world. And I guess the encouraging thing from that is that you don't have to know everything about restoring photos to get good results with these dials, as you saw from the illustrations I showed you. I am certainly no expert at modifying photographs.
So Ken, have you tried doing any kind of a photo transfer silkscreen process ever? For like painting metal dials, doing a screen
you know
print?
what? I have, and I've had mixed success with it. A lot of my trouble with that has led me to using folks outside to do silk screening for me. It's a little pricey sometimes, but by the time I get done wasting, a half a dozen sheets of whatever special material it is, and then, 2 days, hell, I might as well just have somebody do it for me. So I've had some success. There's some things I'd have to round them up to talk about them, but nothing that's 100. I have never found anything that is like straightforward and easy. If somebody has something, I'd love to hear something on it. I'd love to see something, what the materials are, what you'd have to buy and all that. But yeah, a lot of them you have to have a special machine that scans it, scans or rolls it in and creates a reverse image. And by the way, one of the things I didn't mention is that with this, with a one button push, I could do a mirror image of a dial with this tool. So if I wanted to, I could do that, print that out, and then use that with some of these other products to create a real dial in metal. If there was some way, some way to do it reliably and straightforwardly. I've never found anything that I liked.
So in terms of doing the silk screen, you would print out on a clear sheet at that point, like a laser printer doing an overhead transparency, and then sandwich it onto the light sensitive silk screen material, or were you using white paper and a bright light?
Yeah, whatever the method is. Yeah, you could use this as the master for that. Absolutely, yes. If you have the rest of the process figured out. Because the guys I worked with down in Austin who did my dials for me, that's what they did. They basically worked with this sort of program, created the dials, and then printed it out. What they would do is they would take that, and I don't know what they did from there, but then they would send it out to create the screen. And then they'd come back and then they could do the screen in-house. But they would send out to make the screen. I don't know how how whoever makes those screens, I don't know how they do it. It's black art to me.
Okay, ClickSpring, the guy from Australia on YouTube that does a lot of stuff, he did making a great wheel clock on one of his series, and he does make a dial, etching it. He treats the dial material, which I don't remember what it was, with a photosensitive resist, and then he prints out I think a clear negative of the dial, and does a UV exposure, and then develops it, and then etches it in, I think, ferric chloride, the same stuff they use on circuit boards, and it'll also etch steel. And people will also do ink transfer plates using those kinds of techniques, but then you have to have, the way to transfer from that engraved steel plate onto your metal with a transfer print.
Yeah, well, you know what? You can buy in a spray can positive etch resist. Because I know I used to make my own boards decades ago, before you could click a button and get a board in 3 days from Express PCB. Now it would be foolish to do it any other way. But I mean, back in the day, I used to use, and I think today you can still buy positive photoresist, which means you print out a positive on a transparency, just like what I showed you, and then expose that to ultraviolet light. And then you put that through a solvent that you develop. The positive means that you develop whatever the light hits. And then whatever the light doesn't hit rinses away, and then you can etch it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Micromark, Micromart or Micromark, they do a lot of modeling supplies for the model train industry and other folks. And at least at one time they were selling these photoresistant etching kits for etching sheet metal. And so you would do folded boxes and things by etching out the fold lines a little bit, and then that gives you a fold point to create things with.
Yep. Yeah. It's interesting though. I used to you brought up some very not so good memories for me when you showed that dial house in Dallas, Georgia. Dial house, I had like the most phenomenal experience with them the first time they did a dial for me. But I came to realize that what they do is they have an XY plotter, and they basically do the same thing that I just did. They scan it in, clean it up, and then they print it out on a sheet of metal using an XY plotter. And what I didn't like is that they printed out the wear marks too. Like, you know, if there was crackle in the original dial, they would print that out too. And you know what, that's just phony to me. Now, if you print it out without those defects, now, you know, that's not bad, you know, then it looks like it's kind of like it's screen printed. Even though it isn't, but then it looks, you know, kind of authentically screen printed, but they have the wear marks in there. Ugh, that kind of bugged me, but nonetheless, the dials do look good. And, but they did one well for me. And then after that, they just seemed to lose the formula, and I never got a good dial out of them after that. So, but that may have just been a one-time thing. I don't know. I'm not trying to put down Dial House. They're perfectly good outfit, and you know, they have some exquisite, if you send them an artistic dial, they have some exquisite painters that do an unbelievable job. What I'm talking about are, you know, just common black and white dials that where I had trouble with them, but yeah, but their artists are incredible.
Well, in this particular case, this dial was probably done in the early 2000 or you know, around that time frame. So that's
Yeah.
22 years ago now.
Yeah, it's been a while, and I haven't kept track of them over the years, so they might have improved or not, I don't know. But yeah, that was about the time they were doing they did a few dials for me, and at the first few, I thought they did phenomenally well, so. They were trying to bring up a number of young folks into the business, and maybe by now they've mastered it, I don't know. But yeah, they do printer plotter on some of the stuff, so. And, you know, if you need a large dial, I don't know how else, you know, you're going to go about doing it if you don't have somebody hand paint it. It's a real challenge, I'll tell you. I mean, I've struggled for years with trying to reproduce dials because they say so much about the clock and, you know, your first impression of it. And if you do a half, like one of the things I wanted to point out is if you do a dial restoration like this and you do a half-baked job, it will show. Which is why you really have to be meticulous. You don't go halfway and then print a dial out with that crud all over it here and there, because it just doesn't look like an aged dial. It looks like a half-assed reproduced dial, and that's not what you want. So your only choice is to clean that dial up crisp, print it out, and then age the paper. Don't try to put age into the software because it just never looks right. That's kind of my 2 cents worth on it.
I mean, I think a lot of people would, you know, I guess it all depends on the collectors and what age they are and other factors. But in the old days, it seemed people wanted stuff that looked new, even if it wasn't. And nowadays, the young collectors are saying they want authenticity. And, you know, I remember reading in some of the early marts that I had on restorations and how if you restore a clock, you're going to take about 10 to 20% of value out of that clock by doing the restoration. So it would seem for a lot of people, they would say if you're going to do a replacement dial, make a replacement dial and keep the old one.
Yeah, that's what my recommendation is. That's exactly what I say here. Keep the original. And in fact, when I did this clock for this guy, I sent him back this, still mounted on the original metal back. You know, it was a 10,000s, you know, cold rolled steel dial. It was easy to make the new plate for it. So why not? And don't mess up the original, you know, to avoid having to make a 10,000s dial, 10,000s backer with 3 holes in it. It's not that hard to do. And it saves the original dial. So yeah, I agree. That's the way I would go. Don't destroy the original, if at all possible. You know, unless the owner says, God, I hate this dial. Please do something about it. It makes me sick. I don't care what you do with the original. Then, you know, like I said, most of these clocks are not $10,000 collector's items. So, okay, you know, if they say do it, then do it. Anyway, if anybody ever wants to do an article on silk screening, making your own silk screen and silk screening dials, I'll sign up for that. That's one thing, and I've always wanted to see how a reasonable, repeatable process that'll get you something nice. But the other one that I did that I didn't show here was I did a Telecron dial for a customer. And unfortunately, it was in the middle of COVID. So I just wanted to send the dial out and have somebody repaint it. And I didn't trust sending anything out during that period for the fear that somebody would not take the advice of their doctor and end up with my dial in their shop and be, you know, long gone and lose the dial. And I just didn't want to take the chance. So what I do is I created a paper dial from it, and it turned out very nice. It looked really good, but I never felt right because I was covering up what was a painted dial with a paper dial. So, but it looked good. Customer loved it. They totally loved it. The original dial, all the paint was peeling off of it. There was like literally nothing left, but you know, fragments of paint. Took a lot of work to clean that up in software, but it looked good. And that's one where if I would have had a method for taking that reproduced or reconstructed software and getting that onto a metal plate, that would have been fantastic. Really, really nice. But unfortunately, I didn't.
Ken, when you do the fixative, do you do both sides?
I'm sorry, what was that again?
When you do the fixative, do you do both sides?
Oh, you mean spray? You mean the spray, the glue?
Yeah.
Well, you know, I don't know. I don't know that I have a really good solution, but the answer to your question is yes. And man, does that make it a scary process? Because the problem is, as soon as you touch down, you're done. So you have to create alignment pegs going through those holes, going through the dial, and dry test everything, and then glue it and then drop it together. You do not have if you touch down, you don't get a second chance. So the other option, of course, is to use paste, and I have not tried it. Maybe someday I will, but the risk you take there is if you use a steel backing, you trap water in there, you could potentially get rust that shows through the dial. Well, maybe it would help age it, who knows? But if anybody has an idea on how to adhere these things that allows you to give you a little bit of working time, that would really be cool. Because yeah, like you said, I end up having to create take a piece of wood and put pegs in it at where the holes are, and then take the dial, lay the backer down. So I'll spray it, lay the backer onto that template with the pegs, and then drop the dial over it so that you get one chance, boom, it's down, and then you're done. But yeah, the wood laying down a piece of flat wood with the pegs in it, to me, is kind of like, and the pegs, you could turn them up on the lathe to the size you need, it's no big deal, but that's the only way to get those things together and aligned. I mean, I guess you could try laying the adhesive heavily on both sides, and before it sets up, you know, play with that. But then you're going to have this glue all over your hands, and it's going to get stuck all over the dial. It just turns into a mess. So I don't know how they did it back in the day, but I'm sure they used something water-based because most of those backers rust all the heck. I mean, you'd have to think maybe some, some kind of high glue is what they used. And then they rolled them to get the flatten it out. I don't know. I don't know for sure. Because when I have removed the dials in the past from the backers, the water generally melts it pretty quick. So it almost, seems to me like it's hide glue of some kind. Everything was hide glue back then, so, or some kind of an animal glue. Which might be something to try. But how you lay that down nice and evenly, I don't know. You'd have to put it in a spray bottle and spray it on there and then lay it in. Not sure how you'd do it. The nice thing about spray adhesive is you get a nice even layer. You don't get lumps. And that helps.
So one option you might consider trying is dry mount photo adhesive, heat sensitive.
Oh, yeah,
sheets.
that's an idea. Yeah, I mean, you mean lay the sheet down in between it and then heat it.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, normally you would have, maybe you could get a old print dryer, it'd have to be flat because most of the old print dryers had a curved polished drum, but some way that you can get everything sandwiched together and then apply heat and melt the adhesive.
And I can look into that. That's a good idea. And the thing I like about that is that I know that the heat gun is not going to hurt the paper. I've tried to hurt the paper with a heat gun, and it takes a hell of a lot of effort to get it to hurt it. So, but yeah, that's not a bad idea. I mean, I bet you could take it and lay it between two pieces of aluminum, nice flat aluminum, and heat the heck out of the aluminum on both sides, and you do the same, or even on one side. And
You could also use glass and aluminum, and so the
Yeah.
glass, you can look at the top and make sure things have maintained alignment as you heat
yeah,
it.
that's a good idea. Yeah, and then heat one surface. I'd be a little nervous about heating the glass, but I suppose you don't have to heat it that much. I mean, it's not
No,
like-
you're not heating it up that much. I suppose one risk that you have, and it depends on the process that you're using. If you're using a laser printer to print your dial out, the plastic toner that's
Yeah, that would
melted onto
burn
the paper can suffer under heat
Oh,
versus
yeah,
ink.
that's true, but you will not hurt the inkjet. You can't
Right.
hurt that inkjet. I've tried. So yeah, but you're right. The toner would melt. That would be a risk. Or stick to the glass, and either way, you're in trouble. I mean, there were some articles on using and literally using toner that way. And I'm trying to remember how they did it, but they would create the image, laser print it out, and then transfer the toner onto the metal or whatever. Yeah, that's where the mirror image would help, which you can do with this tool. And that I think I actually, way back when, I used that to lay down a logo. I might have done, and it actually worked very well, but it's scary as heck, and it doesn't necessarily work the first time. And if it screws up, it's going to mess up your paint too. So as I said, I have not found anything yet that I feel totally comfortable with for doing transfers.
So Micromark, in one of their kits for metal etching, they're using laser printer, and you'd take your printout and then you would run it through a laminator, and you'd laminate it, and then somehow you'd separate the laminate, and then you would get it wet, and you would remove the paper backer, and the toner would remain bonded to the to the laminated plastic, and then somehow you'd use heat, you'd transfer that. I just don't quite remember the details of that.
Yeah.
But there is also another way to transfer stuff, although it's engravers use it, and that is you print out your pattern in reverse that you want to engrave on a laser printer. And then you put the paper, the printed side down on the metal you're wanting to engrave, and then you put acetone with a dropper on the backside, and you basically melt the plastic with the acetone and try and get it to transfer to the metal. That leaves a light impression. It's not a particularly dark, but it's, you know, for engravers, you're just trying to put marks down so that you can then follow it with your engraver.
Yeah, I follow you. Yep, that could work. I think you're right. You're not going to get uneven. You're not going to get a strong image, but you won't need one for engraving. You just need an outline. Well, sounds like I'm open to other ideas people have on, you know, recreating these dials onto metal. You know, I'd love to hear some more thoughts on that. It's a challenging topic. Okay, anybody else? Otherwise, we'll wrap it up here. It's pushing 9:25, so.
Thank you, Cam.
Thank you guys for being patient and sitting through this and listening and watching. And
Yeah, well, this was great. Thank you, Ken, for the preparation and the presentation.
yeah, well, the good news is most of the preparation for this thing came from doing other dials. So it was
Yeah, thank you,
beneficial.
Ken. It was really great.
Thank you guys. Take care now. We're going to
Thank
sign
you.
off here.
Good night.
Okay, good night.